History of Central Banking and Enslavement of Mankind by Stephen Mid- Mitford Goodson. History of Central Banking and Enslavement of Mankind. Let's get into the topic. You'll never understand American history or the history of the Odyssey during the past 2000 years unless you look at the true problems, namely shyness and usury. One of other or both, I should say both. Introduction. History is the most crucial subject of any educational system, superseding science and humanities in importance. Within its fabric, it holds the culture, traditional belief, ethos, reason, detritus necessary for the continued existence of any problem. If history is compromised by falsification or omission, which are frequent imposed by outsiders, then that civilization will decay and finally collapse, as may be observant in the slow distinguish of Western civilization since 1945. George Olson expressed a similar sentiment in 1984 when he wrote, "The most efficient way to destroy people is to deny and obliterate their own understanding of history." Winston Churchill once made the observation that the further one goes back into history, the clearer the picture becomes. By employing this technique, the author is hopeful that any doubts which the readers may have concerning his analysis exegesis of modern historical events will be associated, if not entirely eliminated, for any nation, state, society, community to have full sovereignty and independence in its affairs. Absolute controls over the means it employs to exchange good and service must reside. Huh? Hmm. Hmm. ও আজকাই তো না which represent the pillar আইলে ভালো না আইলে নাই and must not be delegated to private individuals. কয়টা বাজে তোর কাছে মোবাইল নেই 6টা 16 বাজে which represent the people must not be delegated to private individuals. Throughout recorded history, periods of state control of money supply have been synonymous with eras of prosperity, peace, culture, enrichment, full employment, zero inflation. However, when the private bankers assert control of money creation process, the inevitable results are recurring cycles, prosperity and poverty and unemployment, embedded inflation, and enormous, ever increasing transfer of wealth and political power to this tiny clique whose control this exploitative monetary system. Whenever these private and central bankers have been opposed in the past by nations seeking restoration of honest money system, these parasitic bankers have invariably এই যে সেম কথাই parasitic bankers have invariably invoked the patriotic war in order to defeat much malignant enemy. This has been a feature of almost all works during past 300 years. This book provides an insights as how private bankers since ancient times has abused monetary system whenever they are based on coin, banknotes, check, or electric money by creating money out of nothing as an interest bearing debt in order to arrogate supreme power to themselves. It's also provide a record with ancient and modern of society civilization which have flourished in an environments free from the burden of usury. The solution is simple and self-evident. If we wish to obtain liberation and sovereignty from enslavement imposed by private bankers, we must dismantle their fractional reserve system of banking supporting central bank. We ourselves shall be destroyed and considered observation. কিরে রাহাত কি খবর ঠান্ডা লাগছে ঠান্ডা লাগছে নি তো
ঠান্ডা না এই ছোটখাটো ইস্যু থাকে এই হিস্ট্রি অফ সেন্ট্রাল ব্যাংকিং সেন্ট্রাল ব্যাংকিং সিস্টেম
কি জন্য খ্রিস্টিয়ানিটিতে আর ইসলামে এটা হারাম খ্রিস্টিয়ানিটিতে ইউজারই হারাম মানে ওই যে ইন্টারেস্ট
হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ
ওইটাই 300 বছর ধরে আঙ্গরে কন্ট্রোল করতেছে এই সিস্টেমটা বানাইছে আমেরিকায় ইলুমিনাটি
রথচাইল্ড
রক এই যে জেডি না
ওরা ওই ওই অনেক আগে থেকে অনেক আগে থেকে এক দেশ থেকে এক দেশে ট্রান্সফার করে বাট মেইন ইস্যু
বইটা লেখছে স্টিফেন মিটফোর্ড গুডসন সাউথ আফ্রিকার একটা ভাই সাজেস্ট করলো পড়তে দেখি বইটা
বুঝছিস একটা ইয়া দেখলাম মানে ভিডিও সঠিক যায় না এখন আলেম নামও যায় না ঠিক আছে সে বলতেছে যে আমরা অলরেডি হারামের মধ্যে আছি কারণ সুদের মধ্যে আছে আমাদের যেই যত ইনকাম যেমনি আসুক সব আলটিমেটলি আসলে সুদ থেকে এটা উপায় না থাকলে এই কথা তখন যখন আমাদের বিকল্প কোনো পরিকল্পনা সুদের বিকল্প কোনো বাস্তবায়ন করার জন্য পরিকল্পনা নিব কিন্তু আমাদের কোনো পরিকল্পনা হাতেই নেই
এটাই তো শুরু করতে হবে না
এটা শুরু করলে তখন হলো এটা কি আমরা কোনো পরিকল্পনা নিতেছি এটা যাতে না খাই এই জন্য করতেছি এটা করে তারপরে আমার এখন উপায় নেই তখন খেতেছি তখন এটা মানা যায় বাট এমনি এটা হলো হারামের মধ্যে এটা বললো সো দ্যাটস
ইন্টারেস্ট যে খালি তোর পরকালের লিগে এমন না এটা কিন্তু এই দুনিয়াতে রিয়েল লাইফে
খুবই এফেক্ট করে হ্যাঁ
তো এটা সবাইরই এটা করার লিগে চেষ্টা করতে
এটা বুঝছো মূলত মানুষ জানে না এটা হলো মূল কথা বাঙালিরা জানে না
বাঙালি হলো আবেগী
আসলে
খালি আবেগ পেচ্চা খায় এর লিগে এত বড় বড় সংস্কৃতি গড়ে উঠছে বুঝছ না Winston Chelsea one made the observation that further goes back into history, the clearer the picture becomes. By employing this technique, the author is hopeful that any doubt which readers may have concerning his always excesses of modern historical events will be inaugurated is not entirely eliminated for any nation, state, society, community to have full sovereignty and independence in its affairs. Absolutely control over means is employed to the exchange goods, services must reside within the organs which represent the people, must not be delegated to the private individuals.
এটা আবার মাঝখানে তো যোগ বিয়োগ গুণ ভাগ নাই তাই না কাটাকাটি তো যায়
Must reside with the organs
যদি কোনো যোগ বিয়োগ তো নাই তাই না
which represent the
গুণ ভাগই
people,
হয়
must not be
তো প্রথমে
delegated
যে
to
নয়
private
আছে এগুলো তিন বানাবেন
individuals.
4 আছে 2 বানাবেন 2 3 5 মানে যে মৌলিক সংখ্যাগুলো মানে যাকে ছোট বানানো যায় ছোট বানায় তারপরে ওই যে 2 কমন নিয়ে তারপরে বাকি যোগ বিয়োগ করে পাওয়ার লাগবে এগুলো
The solution is simple and self-evident. If we wish to obtain liberation, sovereignty, and imposed by private banks, we must dismantle their reserve system of banking and supporting central banks. We ourselves shall be destroyed.
বিশের সাথে তো 5 হবে না 5 গুণ
The usury
2
destroyed the Roman
5
Empire.
গুণ 2
Money being naturally barren to make it breed money, is preposterous perversion from the which was served purpose not to increase, not of increase. Men called bankers we shall hate, for they enrich themselves while doing nothing.
এখন আলাদা আলাদা করে দিয়ে দেন 5 এর সাথে দেন আবার এটা 2 স্কয়ার দিয়ে
People called bankers we shall hate. People called bankers we shall hate, for they enrich themselves while doing nothing.
এটা তারই করা দরকার নেই এটা কারণ ভাঙানো দরকার আছে এটা গুণ করে আবার 15 হবে না 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 আপনি এই পাওয়ারটা আলাদা আলাদা সবার সাথে দিয়ে দিবেন 3 গুণ 5 না 3 এর পাওয়ারও এত 5 এর পাওয়ারও এত এম এম ওই যে এক্স ওয়াই এর পাওয়ার যদি সামথিং থাকে তাই না এমনি আলাদা আলাদা না সূত্রটা কি সূত্রটা হলো a টু দি a into b
The monetary system of the Roman era may be divided into three distinct periods where units of three different metals were used as a means of exchanging goods and services. Although there is an evidence of modern human occupation, Homo sapiens in the Rome area going back 40,000 years, with Neanderthals having lived there approximately 140 years. Rome, a city traditionally said to have been founded by Romulus Remus in 1733, which is a region surrounding the Palatine Hills, also known as Latium. According to the legend, Romulus becomes the first king, but later shared the throne with Titus. The rule of Sabines. Around 6000 BC, Latium came under the control of Etruscans. This lasted until the last king, Tarquin the Proud, was expelled in 509 BC and the Roman Republic was established. The Etruscans, the people of Aryan origin, created one of the most advanced civilizations of that period. Built roads, temples, numerous public buildings in Rome. The first money used in the Rome was the cow. This was not a true money, but a barter system. Many early people used cattle as a medium of exchange. According to the legend of Heracles, Oskin's stable cattle kept over there, over 3,000 in number, represented the treasury of King August. The Copper Age, 753 to 266 BC, as we went on, the Romans took to using instead of cattle. Regular lumps of copper and bronze. These lumps are called root. Waiting for entrance, there was an increase in trade. Rome became one of the most prosperous cities. Based on uncoined copper, later bronze medal, which was measured by weight according to fixed system of unit. It was issued by the Roman treasury in the form of weighting 1.6 kg. The full backing of state is known as stamped metal because it was stamped by the government with a cow, eagle, or elephant on any other image. Sometimes they were made to resemble scallop shells. In 2089, this ingot replaced by discoidal cast-leaded bronze coins scraped. They represented national money, were paid into the circulation by the state. Only of the valence machine has the symbols of which its numbers were recorded. Scarce on the device. This money is thus based on law rather than the metallic content. The coin did have some intrinsic value. Unlike most coins, this can be considered as an early example of successful use of fiat money. The fiat money is much criticized in some quarters, for example, by the followers of Austrian economist Louis Pons. There's nothing wrong with it as long as it is issued by government, not by private bankers. It is carefully protected against counterfeits. Non-fiat money, in contrast, has a serious drawback that otherwise sets the prices of gold and silver. Private bankers can control the national economy. Upon 3000 BC was an unsurpassed increase in private wealth of Roman. This may be measured in the gain in land after the conclusion of the Second Latin War. The defeat of the Etruscans, the Roman Republic increased in size from 130 square miles. In tandem with an expansion, the area population rose from 75,000 to 1 million with Rome. A partnership was formed between Senate and the people, known as the Senators. Public Romanus executed the Senate and the people reformed. The political leaders were renowned for their frugality and honest virtue. The means of exchange was strictly regulated in accordance with the increase in population and trade, and there was zero inflation. Debt bondage next summer by a freeman offered his services as a security for a loan interest, where in case of non-payment of debt had been worked off, was abolished after plebeian agitation by Lex Poetalia. The Silver Age. The traditional money system was destroyed in 2067 BC when the patricians elite obtained the privilege to mint silver coinage. This change was typified by went to the temple of Monitor from the old money is derived, converted a sack full of silver denary to 5 times its original value by simple expedient of stamping a new value on the coin. He thus pocketed a very substantial difference in enrich his own private account. The early Roman silver coins was known as the drachma. Was modeled on a coin used in the Greek South in Peninsula. It was later replaced with a smaller, lighter denarius. There was also half denarius called quintarius, a quarter unit called sesternius. Still later, the system was supplemented with Victoria's somewhat Rome Greek neighbor.
এই তো
Consequence, the Roman army had to be expanded in order to conquer territories to obtain supplies. The Roman peasants who had provided the republic with food independence were drafted in increasing number into the army. Agricultural production, especially corn, declined, and the peasant farms were replaced by latifundia, which were the large state worked by slaves. Wages also had to be imported from North Africa. Tensions about granting citizenship, infringement which Rome and her Italic allies resulted in social war. The lack of infrastructure had led the fragmentation of Roman society and the alienation of the working class citizens who were treated as a chattel and who had no responsibilities, therefore no commitment towards the state until the late of the Second Punic War. They were not allowed to serve in the company, in the army, the classic example of society which has been monetarized. The republic was weakened, therefore was is taking place in the walls, villas being sacked and travelers kidnapped. Violence became endemic and gangster terrorists were active in Rome as there was no police force in maintained land in order. These are inevitable consequences of society in which money has become the highest ethos. The Roman Republic on silver terms, which left cause in the matter, was a political intrigue among the elite, economic deprivation caused discontent among the poor, who were increasingly enslaved from North Africa, and social unrest that from a culmination revolts led the Jewish role in collapse. Therefore, Jewish Harvardin Roman Yehud and the early Roman Jews employed themselves as craftsmen, peddlers, and shopkeepers. In the last proclamation, they do indulge in money lending. As a community, they live separately in apartments. They govern themselves according to their own laws and were exempt from military service. Expulsion of Jews from Rome by Emperor Hadrian, 15th century manuscript of Biblix in Paris. In 139 BC, the Jews who were not Roman citizens were expelled by Predator, his emperors and proletariating, but they soon returned in 19 AD. Means of senators consultum Emperor Tiberius expelled 4,000 Jews who had been involved in various scandals. If this expulsion was properly enforced and their continued presence, in particular as Jews, would play a significant role in the decline and collapse of Roman Empire. Julius Caesar was born into the aristocratic family in July 1200 BC. He was tall, fair-headed, and practiced briefly as a lawyer before becoming a brilliant military commander who conquered the Gaul and France. After this defeat, probably in Great 48 BC at Firmus, Caesar became the undisputed leader of the Roman Republic. On his return to Italy in semester 450, Caesar was found on the streets and cities crowded with homeless people who had forced off the land by usurers and land monopolists. 3,000 people had to feed daily at Purvic granary, and usury was flourishing. The principal users, many of whom were Jewish, were charging interest rates as high as 45% per annum. A Lucius Seneca, the philosopher, would later remark the superstone, the customs that most criminal nations have gained such a strength that they have now been received in all lands. The conquered have given laws to the conqueror. At the time, there were two main political parties. The optimists centered around the nobility, the Senate, and the privileged few, the populace who would represent the citizens, the leadership. Caesar fully understood the evils of usury and how to counter them. He recognized the profound truth that the money is a national agent created by law for a national purpose, that not no class of men should withhold it from circulation as cause panics. Neither speculators could advance the rates of interest, could buy up property in ruinous prices after penny. Caesar introduced the following social reform. Registration of property was done at much lower valuation, which held prior to civil war. Several remissions of rents were granted. Large number of poor citizens discharged. Veterans were settled to allotment. Free housing was provided to 1,000 impoverished families. Soldiers paid to increase from those confusion of calendar. His monetary reform were followed. State debt levies were immediately reduced. Cheap metal coins were used as a means of exchange. It was ruled that interest could not be levied than 1% per month. It was decreed that interest could not be charged on that total interest charge could never exceed capital loaned. Slavery was abolished as a means of settling debt. Aristocrats were forced to employ their capital, not hoarding. These measures enraged the aristocrats and the plutocrats whose livelihood was severely restricted. Conspired to murder Caesar, the hero of the people, on that fateful morning of 15 March 15 BC. 4 years after assuming power, he arrived at the Senate building unarmed, having dismissed his military guard who had previously been in constant attendance. Surrounded by his conspirators, he was stabbed to death. In 2070 BC, shortly after Caesar's death, his deification, the Romans adopted the gold standard, which would be far-reaching implications for the financial stability of the and lead directly to its demise. Previously, gold coins were issued only in the times of great need, such as during the Second Punic War. So there were a few gold coins in Europe, except in remote places like Wales, Transylvania, and Spain. Therefore, the most of the supplies could only be secured in the east. This in turn required a large and expensive army, which became engaged in constant conflict with empire's phrases. The gold coin was known as Orius, also in calculation were the silver denarius, various copper coins, Asterius, Pondius. The scarcity of gold commodity money frequently induced periods of deflation as a result of lack of circulating means of exchange. In 30 BC, a measure of relief was provided when the weight of the gold aureus was reduced to 122 to 72 grains. This remained the standard weight until 31 AD. However, metal gold continued to flow eastward in order to pay for the luxury items, religious dues, usury payments. Furthermore, wear and tear resulted the loss of third of total coinage in circulation over 100-year period. As gold was treated as commodity, debasement was not tolerated. Emperor Constantine personally ordered death for counterfeits, burning of people, mints who committed falsification, money changers who did not report a counterfeit gold peasant were immediately flogged, enslaved, exiled. These regulations were effective for peasant, which weighed 70 grains and was slightly more than Byzantine was still circulating in 10,000 AD, weighed 68 grams. In 30 AD, Christianity was tolerated by Edict of Milan. From 38 AD, was established as an official religion by empire. From this time, monetary power residence of the imperial era, social injustice, the understanding middle classes for excessive taxation. The Roman businessman was not trader. The Roman businessman was not a trader but a looter of provinces, as homeland had a weak industrial production base which was incapable of providing the required manufactured goods. As the monetization of society continued with the rich parasiting of the common man, plebeian became the more like slaves. The abolition of the jury system was symptomatic declining respect and importance for common man in Roman society. The role of the church in the decline and fall. The tax that emperors council decreed based that on all income had as the restriction of the invention, the church held one third of one half of all lands and accumulated wealth. The concentration of wealth produced a great scarcity in coinage. Money existed, but there was no circulation or distribution of goods and services. Instead, the recycling of dead money by means of investment in the community and charitable work such as construction of hospitals, schools, libraries. Gold were concentrated behind 20 feet thick walls, fortress cities. In its last years of 5th and 6th century, the Roman Empire had become a parasitic organism. Subject to alternating phase of inflation, deflation, economic ruin, and political ruin, there was no industrial production. Almost all food had to be imported and usually was practiced as an untrained skill. The wealth of empire that was not held by the church was controlled by 2,000 Roman families. The rest of the population lived in poverty. Hmm. The implosion of the western half empire, repeated military incursion by the Goths and Vandals resulted the Dark Ages, a punishing multi-century deflation. Depression followed. According to the United States Silver Commission 1876, the metallic money of the Roman Empire at its highest announced 1.8 billion, by which the end of the Dark Ages it has shrunk into 200 million. Agriculture was reduced to substantial levels. Large sailing vessels vanished as there was no trade. Commerce, art, science were lost, and the knowledge of cement making disappeared. Major factors in decline of Roman Empire were the concentration of wealth, the absence of mining deposits or industrial production, and the vast importation of non-white slaves, with the resultant degradation of genetic value of the nation by 4th century AD, a result of continuing decline in the Roman female fertility. Slave outnumbered the citizen by 5:1. To the most important economic reason was an inadequate supply of inexpensive circulating medium of money and the false notion that money should be commodity. Thus, from an economic perspective, the lesson from the fall of Rome are that the dishonest economic system will inevitably contribute to the force for this. No society can survive a false economic system. For any society to function and prosper, it is absolutely fundamental that the legal means of exchange to be issued free of debt. for any society to function and prosper, it is absolutely fundamental that the means of exchange to be issued free of debt and interest by legal authority state.
আড়াইশোরে দ্বিগুণ করলে ওই 25 দুগুণে 50, এক দুগুণে 250, 250 আবার দ্বিগুণ করেন, দুই দুগুণে আড়াইশোর দ্বিগুণ কত?
The hidden origins of the Bank of England.
1/500
All great events have been distorted, and most of the most important consequences if history of England is ever written by one who has knowledge and the courage, the world would be astonished. King Arthur ruled the kingdom of Mercia, which was bounded by the river Trent Mersey in the north, Wales in the west, Essex in the many 1791. It was the only 7 autonomous kingdoms in Anglo-Saxon. Arthur was was wise, able administrator, a kind-hearted leader. He established the first monetary system in England. On account of the scarcity of gold, he used silver for coinage as store of wealth. The standard unit of exchange was a pound of silver divided into 240 pennies. The pennies were stamped with a star, from which the word sterling is derived. In the 780s, King Arthur introduced a statute prohibiting usury, the charging of interest on money lent, a concept which dates back to pagan era. The laws against usury were further enriched by King Alfred, who had directed that the proper uses for defied, while the Thousand Edward consequences decreed only for sure. First Jewish migration implosion. The Jews first arrived in England in 1066, wake of William's defeat, the King of Harlow and Hastings. These Jews came from Rouen, 75 miles from Fallacy in Normandy, where William the Conqueror was born legitimately by as a William the Bastard, although the historical record does not indicate whenever they promoted the idea of military invasion of England. These Jews had the very least financed for this support. They were richly rewarded by being allowed to press. The consequence for the English people was discerned by charging rich interest of 33% per annum and mortgaged by the noble 30,000 per annum on tools of trade, chattel placed by the workmen within 2 generations. 1/4 of all England landed were in the hands of Jewish users. And his death in 1160, Aaron of Lincoln was declared to be the richest man in England, and it was estimated that his wealth exceeded that King Henry VII. Furthermore, the Jewish immigration undermined Ethel's guide. It was the most merchant by selling a large variety of goods under the roof. They also played a prominent role in the clipping silver coins, melting them in million the plan. The famous economic Dr. Cunningham compares the activity of Jews in England with the 11th century known as sponge, which suck up all the England wealth of land. Therefore, hinders all the economic development. Interesting to prove that the only period of government did everything in its power to make the Jews make up distant trades and honest work. Therefore, at the same time, amalgamate with the rest of population to all nobles. By beginning of the 30th century, many nobles were in the danger of losing their lands through usury and taxation, which has an enormous sums of 6,000 levied the taxation. But the Jews were also paid tax, but at a lower rate at grossly understated income. Wealth nobles were borrowed from Jews. Islanders from the king agents had have their mortgage registered on the treasury rolls. As soon as the noble got their difficult, the king would buy the debt from the money, seize the land for himself. King John was utterly reckless, the pursuit of defense. In 1250, nobles revolted and forced king to sign. In the 15, the document consisted of 61 clauses relating to the establishment of various constitutional and legal rights, but its principal purpose was to cancel the bonds of Jewish moneylenders, to abolish usury, to privilege position of the Jews. In 1912, King John died and succeeded by 9-year-old Henry III, who ruled His resign rise was little better than his father and knife cause affecting the Jews and were falling. However, the soon realized that the Jews had no place in English society. That if he did not take action, he would be in danger of losing his throne. Jury were passed which abolished all forms of slavery, as many of these Jews could no longer earn a living. A statute was passed by King Edward. The entire Jewish population was extended to leave England for one of the 10,000 explosions which was recorded throughout European history. The announcement was greeted by great joy and jubilation throughout the land, unlike the modern practice of ethics and cleaning the Jews after paying a tax value over their the speech were permitted to leave all their goods and gems. Any Jews who remained after 1 November liable to be executed. Including the author of Roman, from first King John to sign the Magna Carta. And the glorious Middle Ages, with the banishment of money lenders and the abolishment of usury taxes, were moderate. There was no state debt, as the interest-free legalistic were used for government expenses. This ancient instrument of finance, known as the Sarang, is possibly also the Chinese, derived from the Latin word talia, meaning stick. A tally stick was made out of hazel window of boxwood. Because of words split easily, they were usually 8 inches long. Although they could be up to 8 feet, the dominance windings such size cut the wood 1,000 pound were marked by cutting the thickness of palm, 1,000 breathing finger. $1 that is sterling American shilling, somewhat less pence were marked by incisions. The pay was recorded in flat sides when all details had been recorded. The tail it was built nearly to the bottom. That was part of retained stumped handle which holds with both. This was known as the counter tail. Counterfeiting has held the whole extent. The flat strap was still in paint. As no two pieces of wood are identical, it was impossible to forge a tally stick. As during the Roman Hellenistic remained circulation, it was however during the period tallies would reach their represent so of state for the tallies were used not only to pay the state salaries but to finance major item structures such as construction wall cities. With over taxes, no state debt, no interest to pay, England enjoyed a period of unparalleled growth and prosperity. The average labor worked only 40 weeks and enjoyed a 60 to 180 holidays according to the Lord William, writer of that time. The men of 15th century were only well paid. The fact well paid that purchasing power of their wages, their standard of living had only been exceeded in the late 19th century. The labor could provide for the all necessaries family good. They were well clothed in the good woolen cloth, had plenty of meat and bread. Houston Stewart Chamberlain, Anglo-German philosopher, confirms this living condition in the foundation of sex. In the 13th century, when the Teutonic races began to build their new world, the agriculturists over nearly the whole of Europe was a freeman, which is a more assured existence than is today. A copyhold was the rule, so that England, for example, today, seat of landlordism was, as even in 5th century, almost entirely in the hands of thousands of farmers who were not only legal owners of the land but possessed, in addition, far-reaching free rights to common pastures and woodlands. With the average labor required to work only 40 weeks in a year, many voluntarily gave their time to building on magnificent cathedrals. The York Minster was completed in 1472, has the largest span During the spare house, many craftsmen volunteered their skills in the building some of the English magnificent cathedrals, which reinforces one of the basic tenets of Western civilization that without leisure time, the fostering of culture is not possible. George Macan from the English social historian described this accomplishment as follow the continuous but ever moving tradition of architecture still pursued in majestic way, filling England with towering forest of masonry, of which beauty have never been rivaled either by ancients or the moderns. In the new church is the light, known craved and flaming. Though the stained glass which secret study is more complete.
সেম জিনিসই তো সমান মানে কি এটা এটা সমান হবে আর এটা এটা কি জীবনের সমান ax y plus cad আর কি এই axyd যেটা দেখছেন axyd মনে করেন এর মান 1 x এর মান 2
Although King Henry VI relaxed the law regarding usury in 1509, it subsequently repealed by the son's king, and the act preamble stated that usury is by word of God. Is by word of God totally prohibited. First mode and end of golden era. During the 17th century, the gold era came to a tragic end. Large number of Jews had been expelled from Spain in 1492 in Sevilla. Eye of Castle on account of persistent government and usury and ethical business practices had settled in Holland. All the Dutch were at the time an important maritime power. It is based on ethical business practices has settled in Holland.
এই যে চিহ্নটা আমরা যে সমান চিহ্নটা দিতেছি তার মানে এইখানে যা আছে এরপরে যা লিখতেছি সব সমান ওকে যে কোনো মানে আপনি যে কোনো জায়গায় বসাইলে মানটা সমান হবে তো কমনের নিয়ম হলো এইটা কিভাবে শুধু এ কমন নিছি তাহলে বাকি x y আগে পরে থাকুক ব্যাপার না গুণ আকারে আছে বা ভাগ আকারে আছে ভাগ থাকলে কি তোমাকে এর সাথে একটা ভাগ আকারে আছে হলো কত মনে করেন de ভাগ আছে তোমরা তাই এই ভাগটা এই লিখতে ওকে যেমনি থাকুক মানে এ বাদে
The
বাকি
end
যা
of
আছে
golden era. During the 17th century, the golden era came to its tragic end. Large number of Jews who had been expelled from the Spain in 1420 by Isabella of the Castle of Ferdinand on the account of their persistent involvement in usury and unethical business practices as settled in the Holland. Although the Dutch were at the time an important maritime power, the Jewish users based in Amsterdam desired to return to England where their prospects of for expanding operations of the money and lending powering far more promising. During the reign of Queen Elizabeth the one, small number of Jews who had converted to a shame form of Christianity settled in longer. Many of them practiced as goldsmiths, accepting deposition, gold safekeeping, and then issuing 10 times amount of gold received as
দুইয়ের পর এক মানে তো দুই আপনার পাওয়ার এক লেখা লাগবে না পাওয়ার এক লেখা লাগে না আর তো কিছু নাই নাকি হ্যাঁ ঠিক আছে
many of them practice goldsmiths and then with interest received a formal fraction result
ব্র্যাকেট আছে না ব্র্যাকেট তো এই দুইটা মাঝখানে মানে প্রথমে আর শেষে
that loans with interest is received a form forerunner of fraudulent fractional reserve system of banking where initially rent to the crown or treasury at 8% to the Samuel Pepsi and the secretary, and the administrative interest rate increased to as much as 20%, even 30% per annum. The rate of interest merchants paid often exceeds 33%, even though the legal rate were only 6% per annum. Workmen and poor people bore the brunt of this extraordinary rates of interest by having to pay 60 to 70%, even 80% annually. According to Michael Goldfield, the author of pamphlet of entitled Short Account of Bank of England, 3 or 3 million pounds had been lost to bankruptcy. Goldman.
এই যে আমরা গুণ করছি না
Cromwell and the English Civil War. In 1534, the Act of Supremacy in the Church of England was established as the official religion of England by King Henry VI. During the 16th 17th century, Puritan beliefs based on teaching of John Willis and John Calvin gained an increasing number of adherents. The Puritans considered the Bible to be the true law of God, emphasis on Bible reading, prayer, preaching, and simplification of the ritual of sacraments. This too King Charles, who wished to maintain the peace in the church in conflict with the Puritans, who were making the great progress in gradually became more isolated. The growing religion divisions provided a perfect opportunity for exploration by Jewish conspiration. As Disraeli, the father of Prime Minister Benjamin, wrote the life of Resign of Jah. A nation of artfully divided Sabbatean and Sabbath breakers. The Clarion Jewish community organized a merchant and the spy was also known as the Great Jew. The robberies who were used to intimidate the people of London and so confusion. Large number of pamphlets and leaflets were distributed. Civil war followed between Royalist and Anglican, and the Roundhouse Puritans lasted about 16 rounds with their new model army victorious and estimated 9,000 percent of population died. The new leader Roundheads was Oliver Cromwell 1599, whose new model army was not only outfitted and professional by the chief contractor, professional so backrolled by Jewish moneylenders. The leader of the Dutch Jews, Manasseh Bill, Israel sent begging petitions Cromwell asking the Jews to be allowed to immigrate to England in return for the financial favors which had generally ranged. The regicide of King Charles, the treasure in which Cromwell revealed the correspondence. In return for financial support, Bill advocated admission of Jews to England. However, impossible while the Charles living. Charles cannot execute it without trials. Adequate grounds for the wish to not present exist. Therefore, advised Charles to just be assassinated, but will have nothing to do with the arrangements of procuring an assassin, though willing to help in the expense. In reply, despite following on the brand will grant financial aid as soon as Charles removed and Jews admitted assassination to dangerous. Charles shall give in an opportunity to escape. Recapture will make the trials the possible support will be liberal, but he also discussed terms comes. King Charles was staying as a virtual prisoner in Holme House. On 4 June 1947, 5,000 revolutionists seized the king, but then allowed him to escape to Isle of Wight, where he was subsequently arranged. 5 December 1648, the House of Commons decided that the king's questions were satisfactory to a settlement. Cromwell then purged the House of Commons with the assassins of Colin Pride until they were the rump of 50 members left, who were then duty voted that the king be put on trial. Not a single English lawyer was prepared to draw up the charge sheet against the king. Eventually, it was provided by the Dutch Jew Isaac Doris. The king was forced to participate in a show trial in High Court of Justice, which was third of the from the army. Charles refused to plead but found guilty, executed. God save the king after death. From 1780 December to 1650, Cromwell, who was called the Protector, held a conference in Whitehall, London, in order to obtain approval for the large-scale immigration of Jews. In spite of conference being packed with Cromwell supporters, the overwhelming consequence of the delegates, who were mainly priests, lawyers, merchants, was Jews should not be permitted to England. In October 1656, first US prison law to land freely in England, in spite of strong protest having been launched by subcommittee of state, declared that these Jews would have be a grave menace of the state. Christian and the Christian religion. The merchants, without exception, spoke against the admission of the Jews. They declared that the proposed immigrants would be morally harmful to the state, that their admission would be enrich foreigners at the expense of English. Cromwell died in the succeed of some which no 9 months chance the sons which executed, although he would be the last English monarch to issue money banknotes in his own rise. He made two fatal errors. The fifth monarch was negligently passed an mistakenly surrounding act for encouragement of which naval export to all. It is it is dangerous to dangerous to the peace of England when it shall be in the power of half a score of rich discontent of factious. Make a bank of our own coin, bullion beyond the seas, leave us in want of money, shall not be in kings was to prevent it.
এইটা সমান কিন্তু এটা মানে এইটা সমান হয় এটা আমরা শুধু ডান দিকেই যাই নরমালি কিন্তু আমাদের যে উল্টা দিকে যাওয়া যায় ওইটা কিছুটা উল্টা দিকেও যাওয়া যায় তো আপনি কি পাশে আপনার যদি সুবিধা অসুবিধা মনে করেন যে প্লাস n ইকুয়াল a am into am আপনি দুইটা সূত্র মনে করতে am into n ইকুয়াল am plus n আবার am plus n ইকুয়াল am into n পাশাপাশি পড়তে হয় দুইবার লেখার একটা সূত্র দুইবার লেখার লিখে ফেলতে